Rashid, Abie, thanks for taking the time to sit down. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I'm really kind of fascinated by your story and this topic.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So let's start with Abie. How old were you when you got into the type of work and trading you're doing today?
Well, I was first exposed to being able to understand and take advantage of understanding market behavior when I was about 11. As far as actually trading, I started when I was about 17. My dad and I were doing it together, and in the last year and a half, I've been doing it solely on my own now.
What I love about this, and Dr. Rashid, you can speak to this, is that parents, especially fathers, are always looking for ways to bond with their sons, and you were able to now get together and kind of bond over this whole thing about trading and the dynamics of it and sharing and information and having this kind of an experience together. So this is a really interesting place to land.
Well, actually, it started far earlier. He was 5 years old when he started martial arts, and so I think you were already a black belt when he would come up to me and say, "Dad, when are you going to start? When are you going to start? When are you going to start?" And I would always have some type of song and dance and excuse, and I'm busy, it's this, that, and he would always just look at me and kind of listen to what I had to say. And Abie's got a very interesting history. He's actually the youngest formal witness before the U.S. Congress. He testified on May 6, 2004 before the U.S. Congressional Subcommittee on Human Rights and Wellness, and had actually had a vaccine injury. And so at the age of 5, he started martial arts, and I think he was probably around 8, maybe 8 and a half. He was about to get his black belt. I don't think he'd just quite gotten it. And we were in the parking lot, and he, like every week on clockwork, he'd ask me, when are you going to do this? And I got into my normal diatribe of explaining why I was so busy, and I realized, I'm completely 100% a hypocrite, because I've been telling him, you don't need to make any excuses, and you need to move forward. And it was like Confucius said, take every opportunity you can to preach and never open your mouth. And so he was, he basically made me realize that I was completely contradicting that philosophy. And so I grabbed him by the hand, I walked in, and I signed up to start taking martial arts. And 3 years later, I was a black belt. 3.5 years later, I was a black belt. And it started off, Abie asked me, "Dad, you think I'm good enough to be a state champion?" And I said, "It doesn't matter what I think, what do you think?" And he said, "I think it'd be kind of cool to be a state champion." So I said, "Well, why don't you start working towards that?" And he ended up becoming a state champion. And then, of course, me being his father, I had to, chase his tail. And so we both became state champions. We became state champions in sparring and in forms and katas and in weapons. And then he said one day, "You think I could be a national champion?" I said, "Well, it doesn't matter what I think." And so on and so on. It went on, and he ended up actually competing at the World Championships. We both did, actually. He took a silver medal. And so we actually bonded in a very unique way from that age of 5 onwards. So we were doing a lot of things together. And we traveled all over the world together, competing, and it was pretty cool. It was pretty, I think that as a father's experience, it was very unique. And I'm very blessed that I had that opportunity to do that, and that we had the resources and the means to be able to do that. But it was a natural evolution for the next part of it, with the trading and with the market understanding and the philosophies and looking at the technical aspect. But I think, Patrick, what's really important here is to explain how he got involved with that, because he kind of got involved with the trading, but he was reluctant. It wasn't really something that was of interest to him. And but he went to some courses with me, and I showed him certain things that I'd learned, and I was actually getting his younger brother involved too, Rahan. And Rahan is 16 now, so Rahan was only 4 at the time.
Yeah.
So the 4-year-old actually was more. He was more active and more participating than Abie was at that time. And but again, it was interesting. It wasn't until he took a mathematical probability class. It was actually a math class, but he learned mathematical probability, right?
Right. It was just an intersession at the end of the school year where he had options on what kind of extracurricular class he would go into. And so I looked at a math and sports class, and that sounded pretty cool. I've always been, into sports. Even before I started martial arts, my mom had me out on the tennis courts when I was 4 and 5. And so I've always been...
Anything to do with the ball? You see a retriever and you think a ball? No, Abie, ball. Anything with the ball, boom, he's onto it.
Right. So competitiveness was really like my big driving factor into actually getting interested in the markets, because it's really a competition, against yourself and being able to control your emotions and have discipline. And so when I took this math and sports intersection, already having a little bit of a background in trading and market behavior and stuff like that, but I hadn't really acted upon it. I learned how to play poker. We went over, keeping statistics in baseball and basketball and yada yada. Then we went into blackjack. But when we went into Texas Hold'em, that's when my interest really sparked, because it's such a beautiful game, and it's associated with gambling. But it's some poker players have said how it's 100% or it's 50% luck, but 100% skill. And so a lot of it is being able to understand so many different factors going on, and a lot of those understanding factors are also put into being able to trade effectively, because most of the time you're actually really trading against yourself, not actually having to predict the markets.
One of the things that anybody that's ever done any analysis of the markets, or that's ever looked at the markets from an investment standpoint or even from an economic standpoint, the one factor that pretty much anybody with any reasonable level of experience would agree on is that the most important criteria that you must master is risk management when you're involved with the markets, when you're involved with trading. And that's where Abie has proven to me that there's no such thing as luck in gambling, because to about an 80% accuracy, he can tell me or anybody he's playing what we're holding in our hands from the cards. And some people may be listening and saying, yeah, that sounds great, blah, blah, blah. But what I'm here to tell you, Patrick, is something that very few people have ever accomplished in their lives. He took 500 chips, virtual chips, on a poker app. He built it up to a certain amount of money, and then he lost it. And he went back to the drawing board. This was when he was 13, I think it was, 13, 14?
Well, yeah,
when we came back from
high school.
Right,
yeah.
so when you came back from New Zealand, you went back to the drawing board, as you put it.
Right.
He went back to the drawing board, spent about 6 months, started again with 500 chips. You want to take a wild guess what he built that 500 chips. The second set of, I'm not going to tell you what the first 500 chips he built up to before you lost it, but the second one, what he built it up to. So I'm going to let you guess, and maybe if there's anybody else there that they want to take a guess, just take a wild guess what he built that up to.
Well, 10x would be 5,000.
The chips, the tables, there are a lot of different tables out there, and so it does go up to the pretty high stakes, figuratively speaking. None of these chips actually have any monetary value.
Well,
you can trade them for money, but they don't actually equate to any actual value technically. It's
what do you think would be impressive? You think 10x 5,000 would be impressive? I'm talking about from 500 over the 2.5, 3 years.
Yeah, so I can tell the whole thing real quick.
Yeah, but I want him to guess first before you start telling him. I want to give you a frame of reference.
So let's say over 3 years, you started with 500, you built it up to 5,000, so let's say 50,000?
So a little higher than that. So the process was I made it to 500 chips. I played for a while. I made it to about 750,000 chips. I went to a table that was stakes were about 1,000, 2,000. I had over. I didn't have two buy-ins to cover the actual buy-in. A lot
of the audience isn't going to understand that anyway. Just tell them what.
So I lost the chips. I started building it back, and after about a year, I hit $1 billion, and then
with a B, not a million, $1 billion with a B. Go ahead.
And then about maybe 6 months later, I was able to turn it into $2 billion. I hit about $2.3 billion at a certain point, and I hit a bad run, and I went back down to $2 billion. And so after this, I was you have ups and downs, and so you have to understand how to deal with those ups and downs. And so when I had that down streak, I wanted to say, okay, I want to prove to myself that what brought me here, I can do it again. And so I took it back from 500 chips. I created a new account, and in about 4 months, I was able to build it back over to $1 billion from that 500 chip starting stack. And so I proved it to myself that I could replicate those results. And when I realized that, I'm like, oh, you can really apply a lot of these principles that I'm using in many different mediums, whether it's trading, whether it's just managing your personal finances, and risk in any game. So.
But the total amount, tell them what the total amount that you've
since my freshman year of high school, I've sold about little over 22.5 billion over that span of time.
22.5 billion that he sold for actual cash. So that kind of gives you an idea to start from 500. So, most people will say 500,000, a million, 2 million, 5. I don't think I've ever had anybody gets more than 5 million. But we're talking 22.5 billion. So the point is, risk management is the key when it comes to this. And I've actually noticed when he's playing a sport, if he's playing pool, if he's playing cards, whatever he's doing, I see his application of the risk management that he's learned. And if I was on this planet for 500 years, I would not be able to achieve the level of risk management that he has mastered. Now, my goal is to teach him all the stuff that I know technical analysis-wise, because that's something that I've had a lot of experience with, but it's the risk management. And I thought that's one reason when Amber contacted me about being on your series, I thought, well, this is the person that you should really be talking to.
So this is fascinating in many respects, but let's see how Abie now took these principles and what he learned here and how this applies to trading and what he does now.
Sure. So what we do basically is options trading, so just buying calls and puts. We buy calls if we think the market's going to go up. We buy puts if we think the market's going to go down. So I mean, it's pretty simple, but it's very. If you talk to anyone that's actually traded for a significant amount of time, it's a grueling job. And so it really, you really have to understand what you're actually doing, what the actual goal of every single trade is, in order to be a successful trader moving forward. Because a lot of times we lose sight of why we're in the markets, why we're trading, and it gets disillusioned to this idea that we're just trying to make money. And so what we have to understand is that every trade, every purchase that we make in the real economy, whatever it is, we're trading something for value. And so there should be a purpose behind every single action that we make. And a lot of times people lose sight of why they're actually making a purchase or why they're trading. And so that gets into that aspect of losing sight of the risk. And so it's really important to realize why we're doing something in any given instance. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that. And that's why I think we have, all-time consumer debt, all-time high consumer debt, and a lot of people just not being in control of their money, even if they've never been in the markets trading.